Welcome back, my friends and neighbors. Welcome to 52 Weeks, the podcast that proves the old saying, experience is the best teacher. And boy, do I have a lot of experience in being bad with money. I am your host, and I'm basically a reverse financial guru. Well, if a normal finance expert is a lighthouse guiding you to safety, I'm the guy who stands on the rocks with a flashlight, waving to you, shouting, "It's fine, the rocks are supposed to be sharp." This is the second week of the 52 Weeks podcast. I am on a Ramsey journey to clean up the financial mess that I made. I'm not a spokesperson. I'm just a guy who financially realized treat yourself is not a long-term financial plan. Oh man, let's get into it. Okay, so if you couldn't tell, don't have your intros written by AI. And if you do, you probably shouldn't put in there to come up with something ridiculous. But anyway, that's my own fault. So, yes, my name is Mark. This podcast is all about my journey, our journey as a family to get out of some really horrible debt. Last week we went over a restaurant that we attempted to buy when we were anything but debt-free. Even if we were debt-free, buying a restaurant is such a terrible idea. Anyway, if there's one piece of advice that every restaurateur will give you, it's don't get into the restaurant business, ever. It's bad. But anyway, if you want to know more about the restaurant and its beginning and why it was such a terrible idea, go ahead and watch last week's episode. This week, we are going to get into, as promised, a little bit of how we got sued right at the end of the restaurant. Yes, that's right. We'll get into that later in this 30-minute segment. Before we do, I kind of want to give a little background of some debt that we got into that I alluded to in last week's episode. So there's all kinds of different debt that people can get into. There's quote unquote good debt. On a side note, there is no such thing as good debt. But anyway, so years ago, my wife and I had gone through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, which was really great. It was really fantastic. It is seriously the best way to get out of debt. But due to some emotionally really bad decisions, we decided to kind of throw that aside when we were probably 90% debt free. And honestly, I hadn't planned to talk about this, but I just want to kind of remember here what brought us from like 90 to 95% debt free, except for the house, to then just going back into debt. And I mean a total of probably an amount of debt that's equal to my yearly income, easily, especially at the time. Yeah. Anyway, one of the things that I had done is I had traveled to another state to work a different job to significantly increase my pay. So that's kind of when we really got almost out of debt. And then the house that we lived in at that time was really cold in the winter. Is like a 200-year-old house. And we still live there. It's a great house. But there was a lot of inefficiencies, shall we say. In the wintertime, the wind would outright blow through the kitchen and flap curtains and everything and freeze pipes at the drop of a hat. It was great. Yeah, it was wonderful. And so we realized just how much of that part of the house that needed to be rebuilt. And, well, we came up with all kinds of excuses why we needed to do it right then and there. And that was the catalyst which got us back into debt. We had already lived in this house for, 6 years. 5 or 6 years. And, we had frozen for 5 or 6 years, and if we had to freeze for another 2 or 3, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But no, we decided, you know what? We're going to rebuild this part of the house, and we're going to get spray foam insulation in there and everything else, which was the right answer. But the wrong answer was, we're going to do it right now. Yeah. In order to do that, since we weren't 100% debt-free yet, and we didn't have any savings in our savings account. The only way for us to do that was to go back into a mountain of debt. And it always starts with like a $10,000 or $15,000 personal loan for home improvement. And then it always escalates. Oh, you know what? The insulation is going to be $15,000, which is worth it, but not to get into debt. Ooh, but you know what? The supplies is going to be another 15,000. So let's get a second loan for now we're 30 grand into debt. And before we're done, we need another 10 or 15,000 to finish the project, always in $5,000 increments. And by that time, you're not just getting loans, you're going to the online loan sharks through some website that I probably shouldn't mention. And they take about out of every $5,000 loan, they're going to take like $1,200, $1,000 to $1,200 right off the top as a generation charge. It's really bad. So you end up taking out a $6,000 or $7,000 loan each time. So by the time you're done with this project, you are easily $45,000 in debt, or at least we were. And that's with me doing the work. That's with me physically doing 90% of the work myself, building my own cabinets and everything. And yeah, it's a nice space now. It really is. But for $45,000 in debt, come on. I mean, seriously? If we had waited 3 years and I had worked really hard, we could have done it all with cash without affecting our savings whatsoever. Let me explain to you for a second what happens when you allow yourself. You might say, okay, well, you take out the 45 grand in debt. And you do it now because you're going to save so much money in heat. And you're going to have that debt paid off in 3 years because that's how long it would have taken you to save up that money, right? Well, that's not how it works, folks. That's not how it works at all. It doesn't take 3 years to pay off that debt because you're not motivated enough to pay off that debt. It's easy just to make the payments. And then since you got into this debt, it becomes easier. Once you open up one area of debt, you get one loan, you get one credit card. For me anyway, it's so much easier to go get into more debt because there's something else you always have to do. And that's how it starts. And before we knew it, and then, okay, so you get more debt on top of that. And then at some point, this goes from a good idea, a quote unquote good idea, to a bad idea. And then you start to get you feel the stress come in and you realize, ooh, I've dug myself another hole and I don't like it. So then you start to think, how can I reverse this right now? And you start to scheme and you get all these other ideas and you think, well, maybe if I could start a business with my family. And next thing you know, you bought a restaurant and also taken out another $30,000 in debt on top of all of that. Anyway, so the restaurant was last week's episode. We are going to talk a little bit about the restaurant this week, and we're going to talk more about getting sued at the end of the restaurant. If there's nothing worse than failing, wasting a ton of money, like 30 grand, on trying to buy a restaurant, it's getting sued at the very end for stupidity. You know what? And if nothing else, because of my stupidity that got me into this, a lawsuit is kind of what I deserved. It wasn't founded, it wasn't well founded. It didn't have any grounds, but I kind of deserved that extra kick in the pants. So anyway, before this, last week I talked a little bit about my fallacy with vehicles and how I bought a couple of trucks. So I want to talk a little bit more about my history of vehicle purchases. The very first vehicle I ever purchased was a 2001 Toyota Tacoma, and I think this was in year 2006. It was a nice truck. It was 10 grand. It was a work build. It was a very basic model, 5-speed. manual transmission. It was great. I love that truck. And I didn't have any credit, so my parents bought it and I paid them back over the course of like 2 years. I paid them like 400 a month to get it paid off, which is, we did it, but it's a bad idea. I would have been so much better off to save my money and buy a vehicle myself. Anyway, I lied to myself and said I needed a four-wheel drive vehicle, and unfortunately that lie stuck for years. So I'm driving this paid-for 2001 Toyota Tacoma. Years later, let's say 6 or 7 years later, I determined that I need a full-size truck because it's going to make my life so much better. I'm going to trade in this truck, and mind you, the Tacoma was in perfect shape. It was great. It was in great shape, but I came up with a million different reasons why I felt that it wasn't in good shape. That's a warning sign, at least with me. Whenever I have to convince myself that I need to buy something, I should just stop right there. And now I do. I stop. I stop immediately and say, no, absolutely not. Not today. We're not going to buy this today. No, because I'm not in the right frame of mind. I'm really pushing myself to believe that I need to buy something and coming up with all kinds of excuses and reasons why I need to buy it. That's a number one warning sign with me that I do not and should not buy that thing, whatever it is. Okay. So I have this 2001 Toyota Tacoma. 7 years into owning it outright, I say, ooh, I need a full-size truck. So I start looking around. And I find this, I don't remember what year it was, maybe a 2010 Chevy Silverado 1500 work build. It's a work build. Very basic, but it's got a long bed. And I wanted that because I wanted to go around and chop down trees and haul logs and bring it back and chop it up and burn it in my wood stove. And I was convinced if I could do this, I could heat my house for free. Now, I had already determined at this point that I couldn't heat my house for free with wood. I couldn't do it. But I convinced myself that I would be closer if I could just get that full-size truck and it would pay for itself. Now, mind you, I was so tight on my income at this point that I had to work an extra shift on the ambulance per month to pay for this truck. I worked as a paramedic my entire career, and I was so tight, especially with all the other debt, that I was going to have to do this. My. Now, I think, just to clarify, when I bought this truck, I don't think I had gone through Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University yet, and I hadn't started the whole kitchen renovation rebuild yet that ended up costing like $45,000. I hadn't started that yet. So this was pre-Financial Peace University. I was still making really bad decisions. Well, and I continued. So I bought the truck for $15,000, traded in my old truck. By the way, that, as I mentioned last time, that old truck is still being driven around by some dude in my area, like 10 years later. No. Call it 10 years later. Yeah, 10, 12 years later. That thing is still being driven. It kills me. It absolutely kills me. I have dreamed about that truck like on a regular basis ever since. I never should have traded it in. It was stupid. I didn't need a full-size truck. Do you know how much wood I hauled with that full-size truck? Like a cord, and that was it. Maybe 2 cord. I'll be nice to myself and say 2 cord. Yeah, not worth it. Not worth it at all. Do you know how many cord of wood I hauled with the original Tacoma? Cord after cord. I mean, that thing was a workhorse. I barely used the Silverado for its hauling capacity, and yet every year I had to replace leaf springs for no reason, and wheel hubs for no reason. That thing was the biggest maintenance nightmare I have ever had. So anyway, I bought it, and now I'm $15,000 in debt. Because, of course, the trade-in only covered the lot fees. What a joke. Anyway, okay. So after that, I ran this Silverado for a few years. and burned up all kinds of gas for no reason. And then on my way home from work, one of the transmission fluid transfer lines, I don't know, there was like an external transmission cooler, and so it sprung a leak. And I dumped all my transmission fluid on the road on the way home, and there was no way for me to tell. It's one of the worst designs ever. Thank you, Chevy. And so by the time I got close to home, I suddenly realized my truck is like, the RPMs were way up there. And I'm doing like 45, 50 miles an hour. And suddenly I realize it's because I can't get out of second gear. So, needless to say, that was the end of the Silverado. And I did have it paid off, but it was the end of the Silverado. So, I put that thing out to pasture because it was worth nothing. I think I got $500 for it. And I went to the dealership and I found a 2015 Toyota Tacoma 5-speed stick shift. It was a work build. It was a great truck. Absolutely loved it. The only problem was that it was $24,000 and I couldn't afford anything. I had no money saved. And yet I thought it would be a good idea at this point to go get this whopping car loan with a payment of over $400 a month for a truck that there was no way I could afford because I knew I needed four-wheel drive. Well, what do you think happened to that truck? While I owned that truck is when we attempted to buy the restaurant and all the things that you can hear about in last week's episode. After the restaurant ordeal, and we had to close it down because we didn't get the bulk of our financing, thank goodness. I was commuting to work one day, and I rear-ended somebody at like 25 miles an hour and totaled the truck. All the airbags came out, and that's it. Because it costs like $5,000 per airbag to replace them, just for the airbags. And there was like 5 or 6 airbags that came out. I didn't know that thing had so many airbags until they all came flying out. Kapow! And one of the first things that airbags do is they start off-gassing. On a side note, they start off-gassing all of the propellant chemicals. And it asphyxiates you. And so as soon as they come out and you're in shock and you've just been slammed into your seatbelts and you got the wind knocked out of you, you also can't breathe because your face and your nose and your lungs are on fire because of this propellant off-gassing. It's horrible. I didn't know. My entire career as a paramedic, the one thing I observed was as soon as people got in an accident, no matter where they were, the first thing they did is tear off their seatbelt and jump out of the car and start walking around. And I was always thinking to myself, man, that's stupid. Like, why do people do that? That's dumb. You put yourself at risk and it's irritating because now I got to deal with these people and they're all walking around yelling at each other. Well, let me tell you, I know why they jump out of that vehicle. It's because they can't breathe. I was clawing for the window, trying to roll it down because I couldn't breathe. It was horrible. It was a terrible experience. And even though I wasn't injured, it was still a terrible experience. Man. So, yeah, there's that. I totaled it. And then I realized that I hadn't paid attention to my auto insurance. And it never got switched from the Silverado to the new Tacoma. And it had been like a year and a half. So, of course, the insurance company didn't pay a dime for my truck. They covered the other guy's car, but nothing for my truck. So now I have like $18,000, $19,000 left that I owe on this thing. And it's totaled. Like, not officially, but for all intents and purposes, it's totaled. And it was going to cost like $30,000 to fix it. So that's out of the question. Yeah. So I had to go and get myself a personal loan for 15 grand. Yeah. It's really bad. It's really bad. Really, really bad. So anyway, and long story short, what I did with that was I ended up selling the truck to some guy from a state away for $4,800. But before that, I had to refinance it with a home equity loan. So last week we talked about how I started up the restaurant with my $20,000 home equity loan. Well, now I had to add another 20 grand onto that home equity loan to get out from underneath my truck so I could sell it. So I could get the title and sell it. And now I have to take my $15,000 loan and go buy a car. So I bought an $11,000 Honda Civic. I don't know what I did with the rest of the money from the loan. I should have paid it back towards the loan, but I don't know if I did. I probably bought heating oil or something with it. I don't know. Whatever. So anyway, one thing I don't, this show isn't about Dave Ramsey, but I followed the Ramsey plan sorta kinda in the very beginning before I ignored it and all this trouble started. And one thing that he says all the time is go get yourself a $6,000 beater and drive that until you're out of trouble and you have money saved, and then you can get a reasonable car. And everybody always says, oh, that's impossible. You can't do it. Ooh. Well, somebody rear-ended my Honda Civic, my $11,000 Honda Civic. A couple of years later, they rear-ended me. It got totaled. Now they paid for it. And I took that money and went and found a 2003 5-speed Toyota Camry for $5,900 that was in really good shape. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what I drive today. And I commute 120 miles one way to work 3 times a week. That's right. I'm putting on 3 to 4 times a week now. I'm putting on roughly almost 1,000 miles a week. And I'm about to roll 200,000 miles, and that thing is a rock star. And there's one thing that I learned is that even though I have to drive in all kinds of weather and snow and ice, I don't need 4-wheel drive. I bought some really good snow tires, and I'll put this out there for free. Bridgestone Blizzaks, the best snow tires around. My 2-wheel drive car handles better with those snow tires than my 4-wheel drive vehicles handled with all-terrain tires. I kid you not. I never, ever needed 4-wheel drive. Nope. And to set this right, I live in a part of the country where we get snow a lot. We get a lot of snow. So, that is my kind of saga of vehicles and the sad story of how I kept getting into debt. But the one point that I want to make here is that you can find a drivable, reliable vehicle for $6,000. Is it easy? No, you can't. I mean, no, it's not easy. Do you have to really work at it and try to find it and be careful and be patient? Yes, but it can be done. I have bought 2 of those vehicles, one for myself and one for my wife. The one for my wife has needed a little bit more repairs, but that's because it's not a Toyota. But still, it was $6,000 and it works for her. Okay. So, and my biggest point, that I wanted to make was you don't need to lie to yourself and say, oh, I need this, or I need that, or it needs to be reliable. My $5,900 Camry is more reliable than a lot of other $12,000 cars. It really is. And I know it's kind of a needle in a haystack, but there are enough other people out there that have driven something like that, and it works. Okay, don't lie to yourself and say, I need this. My lie was I needed 4-wheel drive. And that kept me in vehicle debt for years. I need a truck to haul firewood. No, you don't. No, you don't. You're never going to heat your house for free. Get over it. You're not. Stop lying. Stop lying to yourself. You're just hurting yourself. So, now as promised, last episode, we ended up at the end of the restaurant where we had to close it after a month because our financing never arrived. What happened after that? Well, I said something about a lawsuit, And with the last 5 minutes of this show, this week's episode, let me kind of explain a little bit to you what happened very briefly. And maybe in another episode, we'll get into it in more detail. But for now, we'll keep it short. Okay, so when I informed the owners that we were not able to actually buy this restaurant from them, and it didn't include the location, there was no real estate, that was leased. It was all equipment and ideas. Anyway, when I said, hey, we're not getting our financing, it got canceled. I'm sorry. I'm going to figure out, if you want, I can help you find another buyer, but we're not going to be able to buy it. Their response was, oh no, you've already bought it because you signed this 1 or 2 page agreement. So you have no choice but to give us that money. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Oh, okay, I didn't see this coming. I was stupid. I should have. People are not your friends, folks. If you don't really know them, they're not your friends. Anyway, so I said, well, I don't have the money for you, and I have no way of getting it. And they essentially said, you're going to find it, or we're going to sue you into buying this place. Now, I knew at the time that's not how life works. You cannot sue somebody into buying something. I mean, for crying out loud, it doesn't even matter if you signed a letter of intent. If you can't come up with the money, you can't sue them into buying it. It's not how life works. I mean, sure, go ahead and sue them. But if they don't have the money, there's no debtors' prisons in the U.S. If they don't have the money, you ain't getting it. That's how life works. So we went back and forth for quite some time. Finally, I ended up losing my $6,500 deposit that I had gave them, and everything that was left turned back over to them. Well, then they tried saying, oh, you stole all these supplies, sodas and all this stuff that they had told us to sell. They said, open up the restaurant, sell this stuff, get yourself some money flowing in. And I said, I paid you $6,500. That's going to cover that. Oh, no, that wasn't supposed to cover that. I don't know what it was supposed to cover. If not that, but whatever. So I ended up blocking them. And because at one point, they were like, we're going to call the police and have you arrested for theft. And I'm like, we're done. We're done. We can't have an adult conversation. We're not talking. Block. Man. So anyway, like 6 months later, no, like 3 months later, we end up getting served through the mail. You are being sued in small claims court for $1,490. Well, folks, why? That seems like an odd amount, doesn't it? Yes, it is, but not really, because what happens at $1,500? I get to request a jury trial. So they were suing me for all these things that were missing. Yeah, like the sodas that we sold that we had paid for with the $6,500. Okay. Man. And so I can't make this up. So what they did was they said, we're going to sue you for $1,490 plus travel expenses because these people had moved across the country. And it's like, before the deal was solidified. Well, in their minds, when I sign on the dotted line, the deal was solidified. Well, no, it's not until you get the money in your hands. So, anyway, what that ended up happening was this went to a hearing in small claims, which is not very scary. If you ever have to go into small claims, okay, so I'll spend a few extra minutes. We're going to go a little bit beyond a half hour, just by like 5 minutes. And I want to explain, when I walked into the hearing, I was so nervous. I mean, I brought family with me for moral support, and the previous owner wasn't even there. They got permission to appear over the phone because they didn't want to come back from across the country. How inconvenient. Oh, how dare I get sued by them and force them to come back here and do it. Anyway, so I walked in and now from back in the day, like 20 years ago, remember People's Court and Judge Wapner? A very unimpressed, serious, no sense of humor, old guy with a bald head. I kid you not, that's who was sitting there waiting for me. This guy walked in and I'm like, it's Judge Wapner. I'm dead. And I kid you not, he had no sense of humor. I know. Yeah, I had to stand up, and all it was just to determine a couple of things and set a date for trial. And he looks at me and goes, "How long do you think it would take to try this?" And I have never been to court before. I'm an idiot when it comes to stuff like that. I don't know. And so I said to him, I would think no more than a day. And he just glares at me and goes, "Do you think we could do it in an hour, maybe?" And I go, "Oh, yes, Your Honor. I'm so sorry. Yes, we can." And he's just like, "Idiots. I hate my job." And he's like, "Okay, trial will be for this date." And he like raises his gavel or whatever. And I'm like, "Oh, can I ask a question? Like, hold on, Your Honor. Can I ask a question?" He's like, "Yeah, ask your question." And I'm like, "Can we be offered mediation? Because in my mind, I was there to mediate. I wasn't going to go to trial. That's ridiculous. You know, no, I want this done today." And he's like, "She's not even here." And he looks at me like I'm an idiot. And I just kind of raise my eyebrows and I look at the phone and look back at him. And he goes, he points to somebody in the back of the room, the guy that does the mediation. And he goes, "So-and-so, would you do mediation over the phone?" And this old guy with a mustache stands up and goes, "Yes, I will." And I'm like, "You, sir, are my new best friend." So off we went, back into a back room, and we dialed up the previous owner on the phone, and we had mediation. Boil it down, I was like, "Hey, I'll offer you half of what you're asking for no reason other than to make you go away." And that's what we did. $750. Well, I shelled it out, done, go away, leave me alone. And that was the end of the lawsuit. And I haven't heard a thing since. And I don't think I will, because it's done. It was an unfortunate circumstance that everybody got into. Some with eyes wide open, some with eyes shut, and it just happened. So that's the saga of the lawsuit. That's all I really kind of want to say about it. The moral of the story is definitely do not get yourself into debt. Don't do anything stupid like trying to buy a restaurant, when you should be doing other things like saving for the future, living on less than you make, and staying out of debt. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week for next week's episode, where we will undoubtedly talk about some other horror story of why and how I got into debt, and maybe even a little bit of what motivated me to really start to get out. Apparently, I can't talk. So that's all. Have a good week.